He thought he was invisible tonight, just another man in a tailored suit enjoying a quiet dinner, but the truth was already sitting in front of him waiting to be seen. The restaurant glowed with warm amber light, polished wood reflecting the soft flicker of candles as glasses clinked and low conversations blended into a comfortable hum, the kind of place where nothing dangerous was supposed to happen, the kind of place Adrian Volkov had chosen precisely because it felt ordinary, controlled, safe. He sat alone at a corner table, posture relaxed, sleeves slightly rolled as if he were just another businessman winding down after a long day, but there was nothing ordinary about the way his eyes moved, quiet, observant, cataloging every face, every reflection in the glass, every subtle shift in the room without ever turning his head. Across the floor, weaving through tables with a steady, practiced rhythm, Nia Carter carried a small black folder tucked beneath her arm, her movements precise, almost invisible, yet her gaze flickered differently tonight, sharper, catching details others would miss, the slight delay in a man's reaction near the bar, the way another guest checked the time too often without touching his drink, the faint tension beneath the surface that didn't belong in a place like this. When she reached Adrian's table, she didn't speak right away, didn't offer the rehearsed smile or polite closing line expected at the end of a meal, instead she set the bill down gently in front of him, her fingers lingering just a fraction of a second longer than necessary as she placed a pen beside it. Adrian glanced down casually at first, already reaching into his jacket for his card, his mind still running through quiet calculations, exits, patterns, timing, but then his eyes stopped, not moving past the ink, not blinking, just locked onto 3 words circled with deliberate care. They found you. The noise of the restaurant didn't change, the glasses still clinked, laughter still rose from distant tables, but something inside him went completely still, like a clock that had suddenly lost its rhythm. He didn't look up immediately, didn't react the way most men would. When faced with something unexpected, because reacting too fast meant revealing too much, and Adrian Volkov had built his life on never revealing more than necessary. Instead, his fingers hovered just above the paper, his breathing steady, controlled, as if the message meant nothing, as if it were a mistake, a joke, something easily dismissed, but his mind was already moving, dissecting every angle, every possibility, every threat hidden beneath those 3 quiet words. Across from him, Nia stepped back just enough to give the illusion of distance, but not enough to break the connection entirely, her posture calm, her face neutral, yet her eyes held something different, not fear, not panic, but certainty, the kind that didn't come from guessing but from knowing. For a brief moment, Adrian considered the simplest explanation, that she was part of something larger, that this was a setup, a trap designed to provoke a reaction, but something about her didn't align with that thought, something in the stillness of her presence, the absence of desperation or urgency, the quiet confidence that suggested she had already seen what he had not. He finally lifted his gaze, slow and deliberate, meeting her eyes for the first time that night, and in that silent exchange something shifted, not in the room, not in the people around them, but in the balance between them, because in that moment, without raising her voice, without making a scene, without breaking the fragile illusion of normalcy, the waitress standing in front of him knew something the most powerful man in the room did not. And for the first time that evening, Adrian Volkov wasn't the one in control. Adrian did not move for 3 full seconds, and in his world, 3 seconds was enough time for everything to go wrong if he allowed it, so he did what he had trained himself to do in moments that did not make sense, he slowed everything down, letting his senses stretch outward beyond the words on the paper, beyond the ink that had already disrupted the carefully controlled rhythm of the evening, and into the room itself. Because danger never announced itself loudly, it whispered through details that most people ignored. His fingers finally lowered to the edge of the bill, not to grab it, not to fold it, but simply to anchor himself in the present moment, while his eyes lifted again, not directly to Nia this time, but past her, scanning the space behind her shoulder as if he were just another guest waiting for a server to return. The man near the bar was still there, but now Adrian noticed something different. The glass in his hand had not moved in several minutes, the ice had melted just enough to dull the edges, yet the man had not taken a single sip, his attention drifting not to the television above the bar, not to the people beside him, but subtly, repeatedly, toward the entrance. Another detail clicked into place when Adrian shifted his gaze slightly to the left, where a couple sat too stiffly, their conversation out of sync with the natural rhythm of the room, their smiles delayed by half a second as if they were performing rather than living the moment. None of these details alone meant anything, but together they formed a pattern, and patterns were never accidents. Behind him, the faint reflection in the window revealed a server he did not recognize, someone moving carefully, deliberately, avoiding eye contact with the rest of the staff, and that was when Adrian felt the first real shift, not panic, not fear, but awareness sharpening into something colder, something precise. He had chosen this place because it was familiar, because the staff was vetted, because every entrance and exit had been reviewed, but familiarity was often the easiest mask to manipulate, and whoever had orchestrated this understood that. Across from him, Nia remained composed, her hands now empty, resting lightly at her sides, but her attention had not left him, not in a demanding way, not in a way that would draw attention, but in quiet alignment, as if she had already mapped the same room he was now seeing for the first time. Adrian leaned back slightly in his chair, a casual movement to anyone watching, but it shifted his angle just enough to give him a clearer line of sight toward the hallway leading to the restrooms, where another figure stood partially concealed, not entering, not leaving, simply existing in a place that required purpose, and that lack of purpose was the loudest signal of all. His mind moved quickly now, recalibrating assumptions, questioning the integrity of his own information, because if this situation had developed without his awareness, then the breach was not external, it was internal, and that realization carried more weight than any immediate threat. He glanced down once more at the circled words, letting them settle fully into his thoughts, not as a warning to panic, but as confirmation that someone else had already seen the fracture in his controlled environment before he had. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, steady, barely above the ambient noise of the room, directed just enough toward Nia to reach her without carrying further, and for the first time that night, there was no performance in his tone, no pretense of casual indifference, only a quiet acknowledgement that shifted the balance between them even further. "How long ago?" he asked, not questioning the message itself, but the moment she had realized it, because timing, more than anything else, would decide what happened next. Nia did not hesitate, did not look around to confirm what she already knew, her answer coming just as quietly, just as controlled, long enough for them to think you have not noticed. And in that moment, Adrian understood something he had not expected to learn tonight, that control was not about knowing everything, it was about recognizing when someone else saw more than you did, and choosing to listen before it was too late. Adrian did not acknowledge her answer with a nod or a word, but something in his posture shifted, a subtle tightening through his shoulders that only someone trained to read people would notice, because the question he had asked was not about curiosity, it was about calibration, and her answer had just removed any illusion that this was a coincidence or a misunderstanding. He let his gaze drift away from her again, returning to the room with a new lens, no longer observing casually, but dissecting with intent, each movement now filtered through the quiet realization that the system he trusted had already been compromised. The man at the bar adjusted his stance, not dramatically, just enough to redistribute his weight as if preparing to move, but not yet committing, while the couple to the left fell into an unnatural pause, their conversation halting at the exact moment Adrian leaned back, as if they were tracking him without appearing to do so. Even the lighting seemed different now, not in brightness but in how it revealed reflections, showing him angles he had not considered before, small glimpses of movement in polished surfaces that confirmed what his instincts were beginning to accept. This was not random, this was coordinated. Across the floor, Nia turned slightly, picking up a tray from a nearby station, her movements blending seamlessly into the rhythm of the restaurant, yet her positioning changed just enough to give Adrian a clearer view of the entrance without drawing attention to the adjustment, and in that silent cooperation, a pattern formed between them, unspoken but precise. Adrian reached for his glass, lifting it halfway before setting it back down untouched, a deliberate act that allowed him to scan the reflection in the liquid surface, catching a distorted but useful image of the hallway behind him, where the unknown server had now moved closer, too close to be incidental, yet still maintaining the illusion of routine. Every detail reinforced the same conclusion, and that conclusion carried a weight that extended beyond the room itself, because if this situation had been arranged without his knowledge, then the breach was not just in the environment, it was in his network, and that meant someone he trusted had either failed or chosen not to warn him. That thought settled in quietly, not as anger, but as a cold adjustment to reality, because emotions slowed reaction, and right now reaction was everything. He shifted his chair slightly, the legs brushing softly against the floor, creating just enough sound to appear natural while altering his line of sight toward the exit near the kitchen, calculating distance, timing, and obstacles with the precision of someone who had done this more times than anyone in the room could imagine. Nia moved again, passing behind him this time, her voice low and neutral as she addressed another table, yet as she crossed his peripheral vision, her hand brushed lightly against the back of his chair, not enough to be noticed by others, but enough to deliver a message without words, a single, controlled tap that redirected his attention toward the far right corner of the restaurant. Adrian did not turn immediately, but allowed the information to settle, counting 1, 2, 3 before letting his gaze shift just enough to catch the figure seated alone near the window, a man who appeared ordinary at first glance, but whose stillness now stood out against the natural flow of movement around him, his eyes not on his food, not on his phone, but fixed on a point that intersected precisely with Adrian's position. The realization came together in layers, not as a sudden shock, but as a series of confirmations that left no room for doubt, and in that moment, Adrian understood that the warning he had been given was not just about being found, it was about being watched from within a space he had believed was secure. He lowered his hand to the table, fingertips resting near the edge of the bill, and for the first time since the message had appeared, he allowed himself a brief, controlled exhale, not of relief, but of acceptance, because the situation had already shifted beyond prevention, and now it was about response. Without looking up, without breaking the calm exterior that protected him, he spoke again, his voice steady, measured, carrying only to where it needed to go, then we do not give them what they expect. And behind him, just out of direct sight, Nia paused for half a second before continuing her movement, as if acknowledging that the game had changed, and that from this point forward, silence would be their strongest advantage. The shift was immediate, but invisible to everyone except the two people who now understood what the room truly was, not a place of comfort, not a place of routine, but a stage carefully arranged for a moment that had not yet arrived, and Adrian adjusted to it the way he always had, by becoming part of the stillness instead of reacting against it. He reached for the pen beside the bill, not hurried, not hesitant, just a man finishing his meal, and turned the paper slightly as if reviewing the total, but instead of signing, he drew a short line beneath the circled words, a quiet acknowledgement that the message had been received, then placed the pen down with controlled precision. Across the room, nothing changed on the surface, yet everything beneath it continued to align, the man at the bar finally lifting his glass but stopping just short of taking a sip, the couple resuming their conversation with forced ease, and the unknown server adjusting his path again, closing distance in a way that suggested timing rather than coincidence. Adrian's mind moved through options, not in panic, but in layered sequences, each one calculated against the variables now present, exits that had once been reliable now uncertain, allies who should have been visible now absent, and above all, the realization that any direct move too soon would confirm to whoever was watching that their target had become aware. That was the mistake he would not make. Behind him, Nia approached another table, her voice soft and professional as she asked if they needed anything else, but her eyes flicked once toward the far right corner, then back to her guests, a signal so brief it would be dismissed by anyone not looking for it, but Adrian saw it clearly, and he adjusted his plan without turning his head. The man by the window had not moved, but now Adrian noticed the detail that separated him from everyone else in the room, his hands were still, completely still, not resting naturally, not fidgeting, just placed in a position that suggested readiness without action, and that kind of control did not belong to a casual diner. Adrian leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the table as if considering dessert, his posture open, unguarded, the exact opposite of what the situation demanded, and that was precisely the point, because expectation was a weapon, and he intended to turn it. He allowed a few seconds to pass, letting the rhythm of the restaurant continue uninterrupted, then reached into his jacket slowly. Deliberately, retrieving his wallet in a movement so ordinary it dissolved into the background of the evening, yet every second of it was measured, every angle accounted for. As he placed a card inside the folder, his reflection in the polished surface revealed a subtle shift near the entrance, the man at the bar stepping away at last, not toward the exit, but angling closer to the center of the room, closing space without drawing attention, and that confirmed what Adrian already suspected: the timing was approaching, and they believed they were in control of it. Nia returned to his table, her expression unchanged, her presence calm, as she reached for the folder, but for a fraction of a second, her fingers brushed the edge of the paper again, a silent question, a confirmation that he was ready, and Adrian did not look up, did not break the illusion, but his hand remained on the folder just long enough to answer without words. Yes. The air in the room felt the same to everyone else, warm, comfortable, filled with quiet conversation, but between them, something had shifted into focus, a shared awareness that the next few moments would define everything that followed, and neither of them rushed it, because in a room where everyone else was waiting for a signal, they had already moved beyond needing one. Adrian released the folder at the exact moment Nia's fingers closed around it, the exchange seamless, unremarkable to anyone watching, yet beneath that simple motion was a precise alignment of intent, timing, and control that neither of them had spoken aloud, because words would have been too slow for what was unfolding. He leaned back in his chair again, letting his posture relax just enough to suggest the end of an ordinary meal, his gaze drifting briefly toward the center of the room, then away, never lingering long enough to draw attention, yet absorbing everything with sharpened clarity. The man who had been standing near the bar was now closer, not approaching directly, but adjusting his path in a slow arc that would eventually intersect with Adrian's position if nothing changed, while the couple to the left shifted again, their chairs angled just slightly differently, creating a subtle narrowing of space that would limit movement if he chose the wrong direction. It was not aggressive, not obvious, but it was deliberate, and that was enough. Nia moved away from the table, carrying the folder with the same calm efficiency she had shown all night, yet her path now took her past the service station near the kitchen entrance, where she paused for a brief moment, just long enough to place the folder down and adjust something out of sight, an action that appeared routine but carried intention beneath its surface. Adrian noticed the change immediately, not because he could see what she had done, but because he understood the purpose behind the pause, and that understanding added a new variable to his calculations, one that did not come from his own network or preparation, but from her awareness of the environment. He let a few seconds pass, allowing the rhythm of the room to settle again, then reached for his glass once more, lifting it slowly, this time bringing it to his lips but not drinking, using the motion instead to capture another reflection, another angle, and what he saw confirmed the shift he had been anticipating. The man by the window had moved, not far, but enough to change his line of sight, enough to align more directly with Adrian's position, and that alignment was no longer passive observation, it was readiness. Adrian set the glass down carefully, his mind moving through the final sequence, not of escape in the traditional sense, but of redirection, because leaving too quickly would signal awareness, and staying too long would allow the situation to tighten around him, so the only viable option was to move at the exact moment expectation collapsed. Across the room, Nia reappeared from the service area, her hands now free, her expression unchanged, but her pace adjusted just slightly, faster than before, as she approached another table near the exit, engaging briefly with the guests there, positioning herself in a way that subtly altered the flow of movement between the dining area and the door. Adrian recognized the shift immediately, not as coincidence, but as coordination, and for the first time that evening, he allowed himself to rely on something outside of his own design, not blindly, but with calculated trust. He reached for the edge of the table, pushing his chair back with a soft, controlled motion, the sound blending into the ambient noise of the restaurant, and stood, not abruptly, not cautiously, but with the quiet confidence of someone who had every reason to believe he was exactly where he intended to be. The room did not react, not yet, but the tension beneath it tightened, invisible threads pulling into place as those watching adjusted to the change, their timing disrupted by a move they had not anticipated. Adrian buttoned his jacket with a single, smooth motion, his gaze passing once more across the room, not searching, not questioning, but confirming, and in that confirmation, one thing became clear: the control they believed they held had already begun to slip, not because of force, not because of confrontation, but because someone they had not accounted for had seen the truth before it was too late. Adrian took his first step away from the table with the same measured calm he had maintained all evening, neither too fast nor too slow, his pace aligning perfectly with the natural flow of the restaurant as if nothing had changed, yet beneath that controlled movement, every calculation had already been made, every angle considered, every second accounted for. The path ahead of him was no longer just a route to the exit, it was a sequence of shifting variables, each one influenced by the silent adjustments happening around him, and he moved through it with deliberate precision, allowing his presence to remain ordinary while his awareness extended far beyond what anyone else could perceive. To his right, the man who had been at the bar altered his trajectory again, now stepping forward as if heading toward the same direction, but not quite matching Adrian's pace, creating a subtle overlap that would have gone unnoticed by anyone not actively mapping movement patterns, while behind him, the couple's chairs shifted once more, their positioning narrowing the space just enough to create hesitation if he chose to change direction abruptly. None of it was forceful, none of it was obvious, but together it formed a quiet pressure, an invisible corridor designed to guide him without confrontation, and that design revealed more than any direct action ever could. Across the room, Nia remained near the service area, her attention focused on a nearby table, yet her posture had changed in a way that only someone watching closely would detect. Her weight shifted slightly forward, her stance ready, as if she were anticipating a moment that had not yet arrived but was already inevitable. Adrian's gaze did not linger on her, but he registered the change, and more importantly, he understood its meaning, because readiness without panic was not instinct, it was experience. As he approached the midpoint of the room, the reflections in the glass panels along the wall offered him a fragmented but valuable perspective, showing him the alignment of positions behind him, confirming that the man near the window had also moved, now standing, not rushing, not drawing attention, but adjusting in a way that suggested convergence rather than coincidence. The pattern was complete now, not in theory, but in execution, and Adrian recognized it for what it was, not an attack, not a confrontation, but a controlled containment, a situation designed to limit options while maintaining the illusion of normalcy for everyone else in the room. That realization did not slow him down, it refined him. He reached the edge of the dining area where Nia stood, her presence positioned exactly where the flow of guests narrowed toward the exit, and for a brief moment, their paths intersected, her hand extending slightly as if to guide him around another table, a natural gesture in any restaurant, yet her fingers brushed lightly against his sleeve, a single, precise movement that redirected his attention downward for just a fraction of a second. On the floor near the base of the service station, partially obscured by shadow, was a small detail that did not belong, a faint line where the tile pattern had been disturbed, subtle enough to escape notice, but clear enough to someone looking for irregularities, and in that instant, Adrian understood that the environment itself had been altered, not drastically, not visibly, but just enough to create controlled pathways and limitations. He did not pause, did not react, but adjusted his next step accordingly, shifting his trajectory by less than a foot, a change so minor it would be invisible to anyone not measuring distance with intent, yet it placed him outside the narrow alignment that had been forming around him. The effect was immediate, though not outwardly visible, the timing of those watching no longer synchronized, their movements now slightly out of phase with his, their control slipping not through force, but through misalignment. Adrian continued forward, his pace unchanged, his expression neutral, but inside, the realization settled with quiet certainty, this was no longer about avoiding a trap, it was about understanding who had built it, and more importantly, who had seen through it first. As he reached the threshold of the exit, he did not look back, did not confirm what he already knew, because the outcome had already shifted, not in a dramatic moment, but in a series of silent decisions that had dismantled the structure around him piece by piece, and in that silence, one truth stood above all others, the most powerful advantage in the room had not been control, it had been awareness, and it had not belonged to him first. The door opened with a soft chime that blended into the background noise, a sound so ordinary that no one inside the restaurant turned their head, yet for Adrian, it marked the exact moment the environment changed from controlled tension to open space, and he stepped through it without hesitation, his pace unbroken, his posture unchanged, as if he were simply leaving after an uneventful dinner. Outside, the night air carried a faint chill, the kind that settled into the skin without demanding attention, and the city moved with its usual rhythm, distant traffic, scattered voices, the low hum of life continuing uninterrupted, a stark contrast to the quiet orchestration he had just walked through. He did not stop immediately, did not turn to look back, because the absence of reaction was now part of the strategy, and any sudden Movement would only restore the alignment he had just disrupted. Instead, he continued forward along the sidewalk, his steps measured, his awareness extending behind him through reflections in darkened windows and the subtle shifts in sound that followed him out of the building. For a few seconds, nothing happened, or at least nothing obvious, but Adrian knew better than to trust the surface of things, because the kind of coordination he had just witnessed did not dissolve the moment he crossed a threshold, it adapted, recalibrated, and followed if necessary. A passing car slowed slightly as it approached the curb, then continued on, a detail so minor it would be dismissed by most, yet Adrian noted the timing, the hesitation, filing it away without breaking stride. Behind him, the restaurant door opened again, the chime repeating, and this time he allowed himself a glance, brief, controlled, catching the reflection of a figure stepping out, not rushing, not calling attention, but maintaining distance with deliberate care. The pattern had not ended, it had shifted outward. Across the street, a streetlight flickered once, then steadied, casting a pale glow over the sidewalk, and in that light, Adrian adjusted his path by a few inches, not enough to appear intentional, but enough to keep his movement unpredictable, breaking any clean line of approach from behind. He reached the corner and paused just long enough to check the signal, a natural pause, one that gave him a full reflection in the glass of a nearby storefront, and what he saw confirmed the continuation of the alignment, two figures now, one exiting the restaurant, another already positioned farther down the block, both maintaining a distance that suggested coordination without urgency. Adrian's expression did not change, but internally, the final layer of the situation settled into place. This had never been about a single moment inside the restaurant, it was a sequence designed to extend beyond it, to test reaction, to measure awareness, to see how he would respond when control was quietly taken away. The light changed, and he stepped off the curb, crossing the street with the same steady rhythm. Neither accelerating nor hesitating, allowing the flow of pedestrians to absorb him as just another figure moving through the city. Halfway across, a movement to his left caught his attention, not sudden, not aggressive, but precise, someone adjusting their pace to match his trajectory, and that was when Adrian made his decision, not to confront, not to flee, but to redefine the entire sequence on his own terms. He altered his direction slightly, angling toward a side street that offered multiple paths instead of one, his movement subtle, almost unnoticeable, yet it disrupted the clean geometry of those following him, forcing them to adapt in real time rather than anticipate. As he reached the opposite sidewalk, he allowed himself one final glance back, not directly, but through the reflection of a parked car, and in that reflection, he saw it clearly, the hesitation, the brief misalignment as the figures behind him adjusted to a path they had not planned for. It lasted less than a second, but it was enough. Adrian continued forward into the side street, the city closing around him again, familiar, layered, unpredictable, and in that moment, one truth became undeniable: the control they had tried to impose had not been broken by force, it had been undone by a shift in awareness, one that had started long before he ever stood up from that table, and it had not started with him. The side street swallowed Adrian into a different rhythm of the city, quieter, narrower, where the glow of streetlights stretched longer across the pavement and the sounds of traffic faded into a distant murmur, yet the tension did not disappear, it only changed shape, becoming more subtle, more dependent on timing than proximity. He did not slow down, but he allowed his pace to settle into something that matched the environment, neither hurried nor hesitant, just another man moving through the night, but his awareness remained sharp, expanding outward through reflections in windows, shadows cast by passing cars, and the faint echoes of footsteps that did not quite belong to the natural flow. Behind him, the alignment had fractured, but not entirely, and he knew they would adjust, they would always adjust, because whoever had set this in motion was not relying on force, they were relying on anticipation, on patterns, on the assumption that he would react in predictable ways. That assumption was their weakness. As he moved deeper into the street, he passed a small convenience store, its fluorescent lights casting a harsh, sterile glow onto the sidewalk, and for a moment, he stepped closer to the window, not to enter, but to use the reflection it offered, a clearer, sharper view than the dark glass of the buildings he had passed before. In that reflection, he saw one of them hesitate at the corner, just for a fraction of a second, recalculating, deciding whether to follow directly or circle around, and that hesitation confirmed what Adrian had already begun to understand: they were no longer guiding him, they were reacting to him. That shift, subtle as it was, changed everything. He continued forward, then without warning, altered his path again, this time more decisively, stepping off the sidewalk and crossing to the opposite side of the street at an angle that did not align with any crosswalk or signal, a move that appeared spontaneous but was carefully chosen, forcing anyone behind him to either follow visibly or delay and risk losing position. A car passed between them at that exact moment, its headlights briefly washing over the scene, creating a temporary barrier of light and shadow, and Adrian used it, adjusting his pace just enough to break the visual continuity that had been maintained until now. When the car cleared, the space behind him felt different, not empty, but uncertain, the clean pattern of movement replaced by something less defined, less controlled. He reached the far sidewalk and turned again, this time into a narrower passage between two buildings, a path that offered multiple exits but limited visibility, the kind of place where control depended entirely on awareness rather than positioning. Inside the passage, the sounds of the city dimmed further, replaced by the echo of his own footsteps and the faint hum of distant machinery, and for the first time since leaving the restaurant, Adrian allowed himself to slow, not stopping completely, but reducing his pace just enough to listen, to measure the space behind him without relying on sight alone. A few seconds passed, then more, and the absence of immediate pursuit told him what he needed to know, not that they had given up, but that the sequence had been disrupted beyond easy recovery. He resumed his pace, exiting the passage onto a parallel street where the flow of people and vehicles returned, blending him back into the city's larger rhythm, and as he did, the final realization settled into place with quiet clarity: this had never been about capturing him in a single moment, it had been about testing the limits of his awareness, measuring how quickly he would see what was happening, how effectively he would adapt when control was taken away. And in that test, the outcome had not been decided by strength or numbers or preparation, but by the presence of a single, unnoticed detail, a warning given without demand, a message delivered without expectation, and the choice to listen to it. Adrian did not look back again, because there was no need, the pattern behind him had dissolved into the noise of the city, but one thought remained, steady and unresolved: the person who had seen everything before it unfolded was still inside that restaurant, still standing in a place where no one would think to look twice, and for the first time in a long time, Adrian knew that the most important move of the night had not been his own. Adrian did not return to the restaurant that night, not immediately, because instinct told him that moving too soon would undo the quiet advantage he had gained, but distance did not mean disengagement, and as he continued through the city, blending into its rhythm, his mind remained anchored to a single point, a single moment that had shifted everything before it could unfold. Hours later, when the streets had thinned and the glow of storefronts had dimmed into reflections rather than distractions, he stood across from the building again, not as a guest this time, not as a man passing through, but as someone observing with full intent, his presence absorbed into the shadows of the street as naturally as it had once been absorbed into the light. Inside, the restaurant continued as if nothing had happened, tables filled, conversations flowing, the same warm glow painting the illusion of normalcy, and yet Adrian could see what others could not: the subtle differences, the absence of certain faces, the replacement of others, the quiet shift that followed a plan that had not gone as expected. He waited, not impatiently, but with the same measured control that had carried him through the night, because timing was not about speed, it was about precision, and when the moment came, it was not dramatic, it was not announced, it simply aligned. Nia stepped out through the same door he had used earlier, her uniform unchanged, her posture composed, as if she were ending just another shift, yet there was a difference now, something in the way she paused just beyond the threshold, her eyes scanning the street with quiet awareness, not searching for him, but confirming something only she understood. Adrian stepped forward then, not suddenly, not in a way that would startle, but with a presence that made itself known without force, and when her gaze met his, there was no surprise, no hesitation, only recognition. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the city moving around them in soft layers of sound and light, and in that silence, the balance between them settled into something new, something that did not need to be defined. Adrian reached into his pocket and removed the same bill she had handed him, the paper now slightly creased but still marked by the circle she had drawn, and without a word, he held it out to her. Nia looked down at it, then back at him, her expression unchanged, but her eyes sharper now, more direct, as if the distance between who she was and what she had done had finally closed. Adrian took a pen from his jacket, the same deliberate motion he had used before, and this time, he added a single line beneath her message, not correcting it, not questioning it, but answering it, the ink settling into the paper with quiet finality. He turned the bill so she could see it, and for the first time, a faint shift crossed her expression, not surprise, not pride, but understanding. He did not offer thanks in the way most would, did not speak in words that would reduce what had happened to something simple, because both of them knew it had not been simple, it had been precise, necessary, and rare. Instead, he met her gaze with the same steady calm that had defined every moment of the night and said quietly, "You saw what my world missed." The words did not linger, they did not demand a response, they simply existed between them, carrying more weight than any explanation could. Nia held his gaze for a second longer, then folded the bill once, carefully, as if preserving more than just paper, and slipped it into her apron without another word. Around them, the city continued, unaware of what had shifted, unaware of the quiet exchange that had redefined something far beyond a single night, and Adrian stepped back, not retreating, but acknowledging the space between them, the difference that had once defined their roles now replaced by something else, something earned rather than given. He turned and walked into the street again, his figure blending into the moving lights and shadows, but this time, the control he carried was different, not just built on power, but on the understanding that the smallest voice in the room could change everything. And that night, in a world that rarely paused long enough to notice, one truth remained: the strongest man in the room had not been the one who commanded it, but the one who had chosen to listen.